All right, you guys, welcome to the show. It's the end of the empire with me, your host, Scott Horton, and him, your host, Pete Quinones. How's it going, Pete?
Good, man. What's happening?
I don't know. I'm just sitting here directing the Libertarian Institute.
Cool.
Editorial lead directing antiwar.com. Good to talk to you again. You have a good Thanksgiving? What's the goddamn deal with that?
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, we just stayed at home. Stacy's dad visited, and yeah, it was a cool time. Good time.
That's good, man. All right. Well, it looks like we got a few people in the chat room there. So that's good. Hey, chat room folks. We got some things to talk about today. Good old Dave Smith is going to be joining us at the bottom of the hour. Is that correct?
Yep, that's what he said.
Cool. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. So I got a few things. Today I talked with Gilbert Doctorow about Russia issues. And I talked with, are you familiar, Pete, with the war nerd, John Dolan, a.k.a. Gary Brecher?
No, I'm not.
He hosts the War Nerd podcast with Mark Grumble. But I love the War Nerd. He's really smart, man. I read this book that he wrote, just dispatches essentially his take on every war in the world, including ones you never heard of. And he wrote up this really great thing. It must have been 10,000 words or 15 that they ran at Naked Capitalism about the war in Ethiopia between the Amhara and the Tigray, and with the Eritreans, and all of this that's been going on for a little over a year now. And so there's this guy, I forgot his name, he's got Rand Paul as his avatar on Twitter, and he's been after me for a long time. Or when are you going to cover the war in Ethiopia? And I haven't done it because I didn't want to just get on a reporter who was writing about one small aspect of it. I really wanted a good take that was somebody going to be able to give me a holistic take on who's killing who and why and for how long, and if there are any, not necessarily white hats, but less worse sides to understand their take and whatever. So I was really glad that I waited until I read this piece by the War Nerd, because it was all that I could have ever asked for. So cool. Especially after reading it twice, I'm all caught up. And as he put it, there are no good guys. It's just this faction is this faction and this one is that one. So but I got a pretty good handle on that. Got a good interview out of him about that today. So I don't know. That'll be up pretty soon. And then also, and I guess we're going to talk about this, I interviewed also today Ford Fisher, who's the independent reporter, he did that great documentary about the case of Johnny Hurley from Arvada, Colorado, where this guy, for unknown reasons, decided he was going to start killing some cops. He killed one, and then apparently was, set to ambush whoever, responded as well. And this guy, Johnny Hurley, was essentially a libertarian anarchist type, and just happened to be at the Army surplus store across the square there, and grabbed his concealed gun out of its holster, ran over there, confronted the shooter and shot him dead. And then a moment later was killed by responding cops himself. And they kind of covered up what happened, and they dragged ass investigating and explaining, what all went on there. So I have developments there from Ford Fisher today, and the latest on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's, essentially what I got on my mind here. Good to see our friend Kyle Anzalone in the chat room there. I was listening to his show earlier today when I was out driving around. If I ever get hit by a bus, just tune into Kyle's show and he'll fill in for me and take care of all your libertarian anti-war needs.
If you ever if you go face down in a vert ramp, he'll be there.
That's all I got. Yeah,
he'll be there for us.
This does happen from time to time. So yeah, that's what I got. As far as I don't really want to discuss the Ethiopia thing. That's all I got to say about that. But we could talk about what's going on with Ukraine, and we talk about the Johnny Hurley story. And then what do you have in mind?
Well, later when Dave comes, we'll talk about this new variant And I've been listening all day to news about that, and it's
Okay,
just
great.
it's insanity. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that. So let me just say about the Ukraine thing. There's a story by Colonel Douglas McGregor in the American Conservative magazine. We ran as the spotlight on antiwar.com yesterday. And he's saying, Mr. President, remember Pearl Harbor? And now Colonel McGregor, if you don't know, was the hero of the big tank battle of Iraq War I and was General McMaster's commanding officer back then. And our friend Daniel Davis actually served under them both during that big tank battle in Iraq War I. And he's the guy, Mark Perry, our late great friend Mark Perry, had written a piece for Politico magazine about 3 or 4 years ago about how the war plan, the army war plan for how to fight Russia in Eastern Europe, there are two competing plans. One is championed by McMaster, the other by his former commander, McGregor. And so that's who this guy is. He's the guy who wrote at least one of the two major competing army war plans for how to fight Russia in Eastern Europe if we ever do fight Russia in Eastern Europe. So he knows a thing or two about this. But essentially, the guy's a non-interventionist. Says we shouldn't be fighting Russia at all. We got no beef with Russia at all. The Soviets are dead and gone, and these guys should be our friends now. We should be working with them. And for that matter, he's not a China hawk either. He's not saying we should team up with them against China, because China, they're our economic competitor at worst, and in no way really, threaten our friends, the Japanese or the South Koreans or the Australians or anybody like that. And so all these problems can be solved peacefully, simply by negotiating. We shouldn't be doing any of this. But then he brings up World War II and he says, when they were done doing their annual anti-Japanese naval exercises, instead of pulling back to California, they only pulled back to Hawaii. And the excuse at the time was, this is to deter the Japanese from attacking the Philippines. But then FDR put his embargo on Japan. So whatever deterrent value they were getting out of having their naval forces at Pearl Harbor was lost at that point, because the provocation of the blockade was too much. They were going to have to sack Singapore and the Indies to take all the Dutch oil resources and all that there. We gave them no choice. So at that point, our guys out at Pearl Harbor are no longer a deterrent. They're simply bait. They're a sitting duck. And so you can call it deterrence, but that doesn't mean that you're actually smart, And then he's saying essentially the same thing in Ukraine, as we're saying, we're going to arm up Ukraine and that'll show those Russians. But in fact, it might just show those Russians that they feel like they got no choice but to do something crazy. And in this case, as I talked about with Gilbert Doctorow today, the Americans have been talking about putting these anti-missile missiles in Ukraine. And the thing about that is that, first of all, they already have these in Romania and Poland. That's already kind of an offensive threat, even though they're anti-missile missiles. If you ring Russia with enough defensive, quote unquote, missiles that you can shoot down a major percentage, or at least attempt to shoot down a major percentage of any retaliatory response by them, then that really is an offensive capability. And you're increasing your ability to do a first strike against them on the threat that you can shoot down anything they try to retaliate with. But on top of that, that's already really going too far. But on top of that, the missile launchers can easily be adapted to fire offensive missiles as well. And they fire, I'm pretty sure it's Tomahawk missiles can fit in those same missile launchers. But other nuclear capable cruise missiles can be fired from those same launchers with essentially zero modification, right? With just flipping a enter key or clicking a double mouse click. And you switch from one mode to the other. And so, that represents a real threat in the eyes of the Russians. And Vladimir Putin said, I hope you people understand that this is a red line for us. And he's not the kind of guy who talks very tough all the time. He usually is always very understated about, well, we and our American partners disagree about some things, but we like to work together too, or whatever. He tries to talk in a very conciliatory fashion a lot of the times, but he's warning that you're really pushing this stuff too far and you're going way too far. And if you act essentially as though Ukraine is already a member of NATO, then we're going to have to act to prevent that from being the case. And they've already said, as you and I may have discussed before, Pete, that it's in the WikiLeaks. Sergei Lavrov told a man who was then the I don't know if he was the ambassador to Russia at the time. I think he was, but he's now our current director of the CIA, William Burns. And Lavrov told him back in late Bush years, I'm almost certain it would have been very early Obama, but I think it was late Bush, that "niet" means "niet." That's the WikiLeaks, if anybody wants to look it up. And it's William Burns writing home and saying, Sergei Lavrov told me, you guys better not try to bring Ukraine into NATO, because we're just not going to let it happen. And this is absolutely a red line for us, etc., like that. And Vladimir Putin, in reference to bringing Ukraine into NATO and the threat that America would, told an Italian diplomat that you know that we could be in Kiev in 2 weeks. And I got to emphasize here, Pete, there's no reason to believe at all, other than reading the New York Times, but there's no real reason to believe that the Russians are an offensive threat to Eastern Europe at all, whether America is there or not. For example, look at the way that the Germans are not arming up against them, but instead are just trying to build a gas pipeline so they can import their gas and pay them. The whatever Russian buildup is taking place on the Russian side of the Ukrainian border now, and whatever threats they're making against Kiev or have in the recent past, are all reactions against what America's doing and against threats the Americans are making against them. And then the Americans say, see how aggressive they're being? And they always do that. It's just like the Israelis and the Palestinians. Their violent actions are always aggression and ours are always defensive by definition, that kind of thing. That's the way they do it. And but the thing is, I think they could make a real big misjudgment here and say, listen, we can't back down. If Putin says that we can't do something, well, we have to do that now, because he said that we couldn't, and we have to prove that he can't tell us what we can't do. And so now let's send more missiles and more tanks and more trucks and more guns and more trainers. And the thing is they have a somewhat of a stasis, like kind of low to medium level fighting in the war in the East, which from 2014 to 2015 was really bad. It killed more than 10,000 people. And there's still some fighting going on there. But we essentially had a peace, and the national government there, the national army, is not really strong enough to win that war outright, and certainly not when they're supported by Russian special operations forces helping them from across the border. And so, but we have kind of a messy, ugly, almost ceasefire, and then we're tilting the balance against that and trying to ruin that and screw that up, and could lead to the war breaking out all over again. Now, back in 2015, the Donbass region, that is Donetsk and Luhansk, these two major kind of provinces in eastern Ukraine, they voted to join the Russian Federation. And Putin told them no, he didn't want them. And he absolutely could have just pulled a Sharpie out and drew a line on a map and said, this is Russian now, and no one would have been able to do anything about it. But he refused to do that. And he did send special operations forces across to help them keep the Kiev government out. And of course, this is all, we're talking about the consequences of the CIA-backed coup of 2014, where the Americans and their German partners overthrew, and their right-wing nationalist Ukrainian partners overthrew the Russian-leaning elected president, Yanukovych, which precipitated this whole crisis. But and which was the second time in 10 years that the Americans had overthrown the government there. Bush did the same thing in 2004 with the Orange Revolution. And the same guy, by the way, that they overthrew, Yanukovych, both times. So anyway, point being that, here's a country where the American people and even big business has essentially no interest. Like maybe Archer Daniels Midland has some interest in their, farmland or something like that. But essentially, this is a country that is east of Eastern Europe. This is, in the northern coast of the Black Sea that most Americans couldn't find on a map. And, in other words, due north of Turkey. And it's just none of America's national interests whatsoever. unless you subscribe to all these BS theories about American credibility on the line everywhere at all times. And if we ever claim we'll do something crazy, we have to always do that crazy thing. Otherwise, people will doubt that we'll do something crazy when we promise that we'll do something crazy. And so they talk themselves in a circle like that. And they do the same thing about Taiwan. In fact, they're telling Biden now, if you flinch in Ukraine, the Chinese will move on Taiwan. You can't show weakness to anyone anywhere, or else everyone else will take advantage, and all these things. That's just not true, right? Like when we lost Vietnam, did the Russians roll into West Berlin? No. Totally separate issue. You know what I mean? You don't have to connect those things at all. So anyway, it's the American empire very far from home. Passing out what Biden called ironclad guarantees of what exactly we don't know. Some kind of protection from Russia. And so, I mean, I would just, I guess, ask people, and look, if I have a dog in this fight, my wife's from Russia and she hates Putin. And she's not from Russia. She's from Ukraine is what I mean to say, and hates Putin. And, I guess, so if I have like any particular bias in the thing as far as that goes, then I'm all for Ukrainian independence from Russia. But I'm not willing to do a damn thing about it, Pete. I'm just not. And I'm certainly not willing to commit anyone else in this land to a fight with Russia over the independence of Ukraine. It just doesn't make sense. Pat Buchanan, I think brilliantly, obviously because I plagiarize him all the time, brought up the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Outer Mongolia. And if that happened, then what are we going to do about it? Nothing. And isn't the answer necessarily nothing? We won't do anything about it because it's not any of our national interest by the slightest stretch of the imagination. We don't have any ability to field an armored force there enough to even plausibly have a chance of winning a fight. And so that's just tough for the Outer Mongolians. Their security is not our responsibility. And it's the same thing with the Ukrainians. And back to McGregor. McGregor says, look, Taiwan is right off of China's coast. Ukraine is a few hundred miles from Moscow. Okay? They're both very far away from the middle part of North America. And how are we supposed to sustain a war in Eastern Europe? How are we supposed to sustain a war in the far Western Pacific Ocean? We can't. We're not in any position to. And we shouldn't be even pretending that we would. And I gotta say, man, I'm disappointed in the Hawks, Pete. They knew they had the unipolar moment and that it couldn't last forever. And they had a chance to set up the new world order their way where it was going to hold, right? Instead, what they do? They built a world government that is essentially a house of cards, no different than the government they built for the people of Afghanistan. The whole thing is just bubble gum and string. It's a government job, right? It never worked. So, at the same time, they're trying to convince the whole world that letting us provide all the security and following our lead on all the rules of trade and all the rules of immigration and every other thing, you're supposed to do all that while you watch us completely obliterate the Middle East and create 37 million new refugees, more than at any time since World War II, to turn the world upside down. And all in the name of liberty and all in the name of doing it our way. And now they, like you Twitter meme warriors like to talk about the autistic screeching Reeeee. They can't stand it that now China took our advice and adopted some form of market capitalism and got rich. And so now are beginning to equal America's power and influence in the world. Beginning to, sort of, in some ways. But they can't stand that the whole world isn't immediately rallying around America and the American way against China. And why is that? Well, it's because they absolutely blew it. They didn't pick their best and their brightest at all. They sent the Bushes and the Clintons, with John McCain and Joe Biden and Bill Kristol riding along telling them who to bomb. And they ruined everything, most especially their own credibility. You see it among the American people, of course, but it's the same thing with the entire rest of the world. They have this thing now. They're trying to spin it that, look, it's America and the democracies against China and the autocracies. But nobody believes that because everybody in the world knows that America backs every dictatorship in the world except China. You know? So who's zooming who? Nobody. Nobody's buying it. You and the Saudis are crusading for democracy. Is that right, Uncle Sam? Come on. They're soaking in the blood of 2 million dead people in just the last generation. Yeah. And then, you know, they want to cry and hawk it up that they don't have all the power and influence that they think that they deserve. You know, they probably, other than dropping a nuke on somebody, they probably couldn't have blown their credibility any worse than they have. So yeah, screw them. And hopefully they won't kill us over it. You know, I got a message from a friend that said that Blinken and Lavrov in their meeting in Copenhagen, I think it was, no, it was in Stockholm, Sweden, pardon me, that it devolved into a shouting match with Lavrov screaming at Blinken. And I can't help but presume that Blinken deserved it and was being absolutely unreasonable and crazy, and that Lavrov had just absolutely had enough. And boy, you know what? You know how people look just like they are, kind of thing? And I look at Antony Blinken. To me, he's the perfect Secretary of State for this era. He is the United States, like, internationally personified. You know what I mean? Smarmy little twerp, right? Does nothing but talk, but can't back any of it up because he ain't right about nothing. He's standing on a record of nothing but loss. And yet it's the last one to figure it out, right? He talks to the Chinese the same way, and they just cross their arms and go, yeah, well, you're not so impressive to us, Antony. So, you know, yeah, man.
You want to move on to a new subject before Dave gets here? And what you may not know, you probably do know that people have the ability to send us super chats now. So we got a couple $5 ones. Death says, love all three of you. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Harley Abbott, I've heard of this guy. I'm not sure where. Says yeah, really. $5 for the history lesson. Thanks, Scott. And Polaris 589 asks, how do I convince people that government violence is unjust? Can I take that?
Yeah.
All you can do is give them information. You're not going to change their mind. They're going to change their mind on their own. It's not up to you.
You know what you do? Quote Lou Rockwell. You know, Lou's got great quips about, like, and this may have been Murray, actually, that Lou's paraphrasing too, but just, you know, taxation is extortion, arrest is kidnapping, and war is mass murder. And you just do like George Carlin, man. Take their euphemisms and then just destroy them and say, look, the brilliant libertarian invention is thinking that morality also applies to the institutions too. Huh. And then, you know, it shouldn't be that hard, man. Find a way to break that ice. If they're right-winger, start with the IRS. If they're left-winger, start with the cops. You know, get clever, figure out what they're good on, and then work on them and ask for a little consistency. If they're right winger, they're probably good on guns. So then explain to them why the economics of the war on guns and the unjust prosecution of the war on guns is the same thing as the war on drugs. And then vice versa too. Explain to your left-wing friends, you know how you're smart about the war on drugs? Well, same thing applies to guns, dude. Who do you think's sitting in jail on gun charges, man? This guy got caught with drugs in his pocket twice and a gun once, and now he's doing life. Didn't hurt anyone. You know? So figure out what they're good on, man, and then bring them with you.
Yep.
Okay, let me say real quick.
Just got another super chat in. Sim Kalpin asks, what is the next big foreign intervention misadventure that worries you most?
I guess Russia. Or China, you know, those are, I don't think they're going to Iran, for example. I don't think the Israelis got the chutzpah to drag us into that war without permission, and I don't think they'll get permission.
Dude, if
Yemen too, man. Yeah, Yemen, and look, if we could stop the current war on Yemen, Pete, we now have the biggest, baddest version of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula that ever existed, times 1,000. Now what are we going to do with them? And when we switch back to the other side of the war again. You know, it's going to be a hell of a thing, man.
Yeah. Just thank Fubadu for giving us $5. He's always on my live streams, throwing a little bit of cash out there. Joshua Russo says, you can't swear in super chats. Tell us mean stuff about Adrian Zenz.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I just saw something funny today about Adrian Zenz, where somebody had put a note in his shoe that said, "Help, I'm a Uyghur slave," in English, in bad handwriting. "Help, I'm a Uyghur slave and I need saving," and all this, and posted that on Twitter. And Adrian Zenz just ran with it and said, "Oh yeah, it's a North Face shoe, whatever." And somebody on Twitter says, "Well, I got a shoe like that." And somebody else says, "Well, check the tag and see where it's made." And it says, "Made in Vietnam," you know, right on the damn thing. So anyway, it just goes to show. And then the guy was joking about how this one German born again crank is responsible for the entire campaign, that there's a genocide going on in Western China, when there's just no other information that would call it that whatsoever, anything like that at all. But this one guy has been that successful in getting that, you know, going.
Our Libertarian Institute friend here, Patrick McFarlane, says that Peter Lee is saying they're going to try to drag out the Uyghur issue to boycott the Olympics.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Yeah. And Patrick McFarlane, by the way, people just type in Liberty Weekly and Uyghurs, and he's done really great work on all that stuff. So Dave is backstage. But let me just say, before we bring Dave on, let me just say real quickly on the Johnny Hurley thing, because I took way too much time on the Eastern Europe there. But the cop story, Pete, was that after Johnny Hurley had shot the bad guy, that then he went over and picked up the bad guy's rifle. And that then when the cops showed up, they saw Johnny with the rifle and assumed and pulled the trigger. But they didn't show that. They didn't demonstrate that at all.
Do they have video of that? Do they have?
Well, yes. So that's what's happened now, is finally they have come forward with the footage, and they have demonstrated, to not 1,000,000% conclusive, but it's funny the way the video is cropped and whatever, but it does seem very much, it satisfied me. And I talked with Ford Fisher about this as well, that he agreed that it does seem to show that after he was shot, he dropped the rifle on the ground. So he was holding it at the time that he was shot. But then the cop says, when the cop laid eyes on him, he was manipulating the rifle, right? Which Ford says, and you and I are both thinking, and our audience is all thinking the exact same thing, which is, yeah, he was detaching the magazine and clearing the chamber is what he was doing, right? He was rendering the weapon harmless is what he was doing. But the cop, I'm not taking his side, but I'm just saying this is, you know, what happened, and his explanation for the event that happened was he saw the guy with the rifle and he had his back to a brick wall, or not, maybe not his back, but he had a brick wall behind him. And he knew that if he moved just one step to the left or the right, that he would no longer have a clean shot, and the whole public square would essentially be in the open in the background. And he knew in this moment he had a shot to take where he had a brick wall behind the target, and he took it. But he did not say freeze. He did not say drop it. And his excuse was, well, I only had a handgun and he had a rifle. So if I had said freeze or drop it, then it would have been, you know, I would have been overmatched in our shootout. So I just decided to take the shot anyway. And then it turned out he killed the hero. By the way, the hero who ran toward a guy with a rifle, armed with only a handgun, and went and took his position of safety, identified his target clearly and correctly, and then moved and took that target out and killed the man with the rifle with his handgun. But the cop cannot be expected to do the same in the same situation whatsoever. And so it clearly was a mistake. And as Ford said, Johnny and the cop both thought they were protecting their community that day. They heard gunshots and they both ran toward the gunshots. Give them credit. Okay. But the cop blew away the hero, and he won't be held accountable because, Pete, it's reasonable that he made that choice, which I never heard of a law like that. Tell me if you ever heard another case where, well, Your Honor, I did shoot him in the back, but he was holding a rifle and I only had a handgun. I've never heard of that. I don't think that a regular human would get away with that, but a government employee can. And so that's the bad news. The truth came out, and the truth was that Johnny had unfortunately picked up the rifle right at the moment, obviously not to do anything with it other than to render it inert. But right in the moment when the cop, first put his eye on him, identified him as a target and a safe target to engage in the moment, and took his gamble and lost. Well, won, but missed and got the wrong guy. So that's the tragedy of Johnny Hurley. He was a libertarian anarchist, again, from Arvada, Colorado. He was a member of We Are Change and was apparently an anti-police activist and anti-government activist of all kinds. And yeah. And by the way, 3 cheers for Ford Fisher, who's this great new independent video journalist who goes traveling all around the country and covering these stories in a way that we just wouldn't get our hands on them any other way, I don't think. So there's that. You gonna click the button on Dave? There he is.
Hey, man.
Dave What's Smith. Up, boys?
How you doing, bud?
Doing good, man. How are you guys?
Real good, man.
That's a real sad story, man. I remember we were up in Pork Fest, was like a couple days after that had happened, and Luke was up there, and he was just, he was all torn up about it. It's a horrible story.
Yeah, I know that was, one of his associates there, the We Are Change guys.
Yeah.
Yep, it is. It's a bad one. Understandable, but just one of those really shitty things.
Well, I'm not, it's like, I'm not really even like, I'm not like I don't know. I'm not like a vengeful type of person in terms of like justice like that. Like if there is an accidental death, I don't want to like, I don't want to see someone like go to jail for life or something like that. But if there was, if like you were saying, if it was any normal person, there would be some type of like liability, just some type of like restitution that would be owed.
Yeah, something. Well, there won't be because it's a government employee, so don't forget that.
There you go.
Yep.
All right. Well, what are we talking about?
I turned this part of the show over to you guys mostly, right?
Cool. Yeah, man.
Those are famous last words from Scott Horton. And I set him off with one thing, and then it's we'll see.
So, Dave, Omicron. What are you hearing about Omicron? I've been following this all day. I've been listening to audio on this all day. I heard you talk about it last night. What are you thinking?
Right. Well, yeah. So like I said last night, first off, great name if you want to scare people. Much scarier than Delta. Delta sounds like some shit that you could just, like, whatever, I'll handle Delta. But Omicron, that's sounds like a transformer. So I don't know. I think since all the COVID, then things have been pretty insane, over the last, what is it? Is it 20 months now? I keep saying how many months it is.
21 now.
21 months. Okay. So this to me, and there's been a lot of hysteria, but I think this is probably the point where the hysteria and the reality are the most separated that they've ever been. And I don't, I'm not trying to downplay COVID or downplay what this new variant could be. I don't know. COVID's a serious virus. It turned Pete into a right winger. Like, it'll do some damage to you. You know what I mean? But
that was before.
I'm just kidding. But all of the evidence, like the actual evidence coming out, meaning like the reports from doctors in South Africa, all of the actual data that you can get your hands on, the indications seem to be about as positive as it could be for a new variant. Like, they're all like, yeah, it seems like a less deadly variant, possibly more or less contagious than Delta. We don't really know that. But if it is going in the direction of less deadly, more contagious, then this is kind of like, all right, this is kind of the best case scenario of what we would think. This is the evolutionary pressure on COVID, that it's going to be here forever. We're not going to eradicate COVID. This is just impossible. It lives in animals. You're not going to eradicate this virus, but maybe it could be on its way to the common cold eventually, and we could get better and better treatments. All the focus should be off of vaccines at this point and onto treatments, in my estimation. The truth is that even the pharmaceutical companies are saying, well, we can develop vaccines that are effective for these new variants within 6 months, but that doesn't matter, because by that point there's a new variant, and it doesn't make any sense. But so there's really not I think not much to be alarmed about with this. And of course, everyone is freaking out. Like, I mean, the corporate press is like, Jim Cramer is demanding the military come in and start running trials for you to prove that you are a conscientious, resistor to not taking the vaccine, and lockdowns for the unvaccinated are being floated out. So it's a weird moment where, even though it's kind of scary to see actual important, powerful people advocating all of this stuff, I have a little bit of an optimistic feeling about this. Like, I'm like, oh no, this is a little too crazy for the reality on the ground. Yeah. And we're not, for them, like, it's not that governments can't pull off this level of propaganda, but you need like North Korea style government control to pull off this level of propaganda. And they just don't have it here. Like, even as hysterical as the propaganda in like March 2020 was, none of us really knew better. Like, we didn't know better the way we know now. This is just like, I don't know. Delta wasn't the nightmare that they claimed Delta was going to be. And this one, all indications, we don't know for sure, but all indications are that this is going to be, is just not going to be that severe.
Yeah, I've been following the No Agenda podcast, and they find every audio of every interview about the about anything like this. And they had one with Francis Collins, who is actually Fauci's boss, and I think he's stepping down at NIH. And he said, and he's laughing about it too. He's at first he's like, we have to be careful about this. We don't know, but he's chuckling while he's doing it, which is really weird. And he says towards the end, he goes, when we look at this variant, what we know about this variant is it looks like it's deteriorating and we're almost down to where the common cold is. So I don't know how much they can keep this going anymore. And
hey guys, I mean, isn't this oops, I gotta hit that button. Isn't this what I told you back at the beginning when I talked to my epidemiologist friend? In fact, even before I talked to him, I said the big hope is it'll be like the Andromeda strain. And remember that the way that book ends, they think that this virus is going to wipe out mankind, and at the last minute it evolves to be essentially harmless. And that's probably, and you think of the evolutionary pressure on the thing, if it wants to survive, it's got to be less deadly and more transmissible.
Right.
So you let it go for a few generations, and then this is what you get: less deadly and more transmissible. And in fact, if it's more transmissible, then good, because that means it crowds out the Delta, which is, still pretty dangerous. If this is less dangerous. And I saw one of these doctors say that, well, one of the reasons they think the vaccines won't work very well on this one is because it's changed in so many different places on the one germ. It's so many different evolutionary changes at once. But that also has really taken the effectiveness out of the virus as well. It's changed in so many ways. It seems to be less infectious and less dangerous for the people who've had it. And I saw the South African doctor, who I guess has treated the most patients who've had it, has said that, oh yeah, no, it's been all very mild and pretty good, not too bad. So I think you're right, Dave, that the level of panic on the ratio compared to, just what a big deal it isn't. This is actually the good news we've been waiting for.
Yeah,
right? Is the quite a bit less dangerous and more transmissible version. Hopefully 2 or 3 years from now, it will just be essentially another cold-like virus. And we do have more than 500,000 dead. So it ain't, but that's so far. But it could really evolve to be something much less dangerous, hopefully sooner than later. And hopefully this is really the start of that.
I was talking about this on my show last night. But there's something, and I think a bunch of libertarians have made this point. I remember Curtis Yarvin made this point when he did his Tucker Carlson interview, which I thought was a really great point that he made, where he was like, it's like everything, like, and this is ultimately, I think, why I'm an anarchist. I think why all of us are in our hearts, that it's like politics poisons everything, and even it poisons like even really, really smart people. And there are it's like if you go to modern, any kind of modern scientist, if you were to go to some Ivy League university and go to their science department and someone doing lab studies or whatever, you would if you go find some chemist or something like that, they're just they know so much about the world and they're right about everything. They're like, look, this is what we've figured out after all of these years of doing chemistry, and we know all of this. And you go to a physics department and all bunch of brilliant geniuses and all of this and all. And then and if you were to talk to climate scientists, they know a ton about the climate. until you start talking about climate change. And then they all like give you these like hysterical predictions that none of them end up coming true because it's a completely politicized issue. And it's the same is true with COVID. Like, and I was talking about, I've dealt with, you know, because I've talked a lot about the situation I've been going through. I've dealt with a lot of doctors in the last few months, and like some of the best in the world, like world-renowned, incredible doctors. I've been very fortunate to have them taking care of my boy. And they're geniuses. Like I was at Columbia Presbyterian Children's Hospital, which is like it's like the #1 children's hospital in the world. There's these unbelievable doctors. They're all brilliant geniuses, like all of them. Every single thing they do there, they have like an exact scientific answer for why they're doing it. There's never a thing where you go, well, why are you doing that? Why are you giving them this? Or why are you doing this test? So they'll always explain it to you. Oh, there's a reason, because we know what the fuck we're doing. Because we're way smarter than you, and we know what we're doing, and you have no idea. So, and then you go, yep, you're sure right about that, you know? Except their COVID policy is just insane. I mean, I remember they were giving my wife a COVID test before she went into labor, and we're waiting like an hour to get this test result back. And they're like, we can't go in until we get the COVID test. And I'm like, well, what happens if she pops positive for COVID? What are you not going to deliver the baby? And they're like, well, no, then we take your baby into a special makeshift NICU instead of bringing him up to the regular NICU. And I was like, oh, so if she has COVID, then the baby has COVID? And they're like, no, we've actually never seen a case where a mother had COVID and then the baby came out having COVID. And I was like, so then why are we doing this? I'm like, I know. And they go, I know, it's stupid. Even them, these brilliant doctors just go, I know, it's just, we're just going along with it because we're doing it. And then she comes back, the test is negative, she doesn't have COVID, and they go, she has to wear a mask during the delivery. And I just flipped out. I literally lost my shit. And I was like, well, wait a minute, what? You just did a COVID test. You know she doesn't have COVID, so why would she have to wear a mask? And they're like, yeah, it makes no sense. And then I just flipped it. And then there was one cool doctor, this anesthesiologist, and he was like, yeah, just take off the mask, whatever, we don't care, fine. Yeah, because he acknowledged, it's like, this makes no sense. But there's no other thing you could get these brilliant genius doctors to follow that makes no scientific sense other than something where there's this mass hysteria around it. You know what I mean? And like, that's what happens with these things. And it's like, politics is so poisonous that no one can just look at this and go like, hey, let's just have a rational conversation. Everyone is so, it's not just the financial incentives. It's like the identity incentives. Like people have bought into like, I am on this side of this issue, and therefore I cannot admit that I'm wrong about my identity if I say that, no, this isn't actually the proper way to handle things. And so, you know, talking the other day, I'll wrap up on this, but the other day I was talking to this doctor's really good doctor, but he goes to me, he goes, you know, knowing this new variant's coming out, you guys should really make sure you're vaccinated, and like everyone you're around are vaccinated. And I go, well, do the vaccines work against this new variant? And he goes, well, we don't know. We have no way of knowing, you know? And we're talking for a while, and then he goes, well, the reason it's this new variant was tearing through South Africa is because they're highly unvaccinated. And I was like, but you just said you don't know if the vaccines work against this new variant. And he just had nothing to say. And then I was like, but what about all the really highly vaccinated countries where the virus is tearing through those countries? Like, what's, and it's like, they're just like, look, I know, I'm just kind of repeating what everyone else has told me. And they're just not ready to identify as the guy who challenges every single institution that they kind of look to. And it's a shame, because we just need like an actual adult conversation about this. And it's rare.
I mean, you have to be vaxxed to travel internationally. How the hell did it get here?
Yeah.
I mean, how the hell is this thing spreading all over the world if you have to be vaxxed to travel? That's the reason I didn't go to PFS this year. I wasn't going to deal with any of that bull crap.
Yeah.
It's like, how is it spreading? Well, do I have to say it? Vaccinated people are spreading it.
And the people who got it here, the cases in America, the ones that were confirmed were like 2 cases. And I don't even understand exactly how they're confirming which variant this is. But regardless, the ones that were confirmed here, they said were vaccinated people who had mild symptoms. So you're like, so what are we talking about? Like, what is this? Like,
well, and look, back to what you were saying, Dave, about how, yeah, but you know what? I mean, they're essentially trying everybody's patience with this stuff now. And you guys may have seen Tom Wood's email yesterday, where he was quoting, CNN lady saying, well, I don't know if we need to be declaring a state of emergency, and I don't think we need to be locking down. And this is, as he put it, this lady who's been reliably horrible on all of this all along. And she's even looking at this insane level of overreaction over this new milder strain and saying, well, geez, I really don't know. And by the way, I saw someone in the chat corrected my lingo there. I said it wrong. What I was trying to say was less dangerous, but more transmissible. But I ended up using the wrong glossary words there. Got me there. But I saw something else, though, that pissed me off. And I see this all the time, which is, died with COVID, but not of COVID. Oh, yeah? Well, what about all the people who died because of COVID 5 days after they didn't have COVID anymore? I got a friend who he hadn't had COVID in days and days, but he still died of pneumonia because his lungs were destroyed because of the COVID. So are we counting?
Well, did they count that? Did they count that as a COVID death?
Do what?
Do they count that as a COVID death?
Well, I don't know. They sure as hell should. If somebody has diabetes and they're sitting in their chair and then they get COVID and then they die, and then every libertarian goes, "Nuh-uh, he had a comorbidity." Yeah, well, he was alive with diabetes. Now he's dead with COVID and diabetes. So, yes, you can blame the diabetes for being a comorbidity, but I don't know why we have to bend over backwards to acquit COVID at every opportunity.
But there is,
I don't know why we didn't go crazy when the person with diabetes was killed by the flu before all of this.
Well, it wasn't more than 500,000 in a year. I mean, Pete, you were sick for what, 4 weeks?
3 weeks.
So for 3.5 of those weeks, you didn't have COVID. You had already excreted out your COVID, but you still had to deal with your pneumonia and your lungs coming back to full health and what have you for weeks and weeks after that.
Yeah, so but I'd say, Scott, listen, I get what you're saying, and I actually think you're probably right about that point. But I do understand where, there is an impulse, I think, amongst good people, and I mean, I don't know, I certainly have this impulse, so maybe that makes it good people. But it's like if Ron Paul had stood up in 2007 at the presidential debates, and he had a space to say something, and he said, what I just want to say is that I think the terrorists are evil and they deserve to be brought to justice. It's like, that's not exactly wrong, but it's like, what are you adding to the conversation by saying that when everyone's already saying it? So I do understand where there is this impulse. I think it's not necessarily like downplaying the virus, but when everyone is in this moment of hysteria over this, like to the point where they're saying, we need to give up everything. And this is not like an exaggeration, like every societal norm, down from seeing a person's face to standing near them, to shaking their hands, to going to work, to going to funerals, to like discrimination under the law, to go to the freaking like Knicks game or whatever. It's like, I understand where the impulse on people is to be like, no, someone needs to be in here saying like the other side of this, which is actually way more important. That it's like, no, you guys are all being hysterical and overreacting to, and so I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just like,
that's fine. I just don't like BS arguments. And, died with COVID, but not of it is a BS argument, and I hear it all the time. And I don't see why.
It's not a BS argument. It's just there's also another side to that you're making the point. But there are a lot of people who are listed as dying with COVID where they died with 5 comorbidities. Where it's like, this is kind of. It's a very arbitrary thing to say that COVID is what killed them. But you're probably right. Now, I don't know if your buddy's listed as a COVID death or not.
Well, what's really arbitrary is, as my epidemiologist friend was telling me back in March of 2020 or whatever it is, that all 17,000 counties or whatever it is, 12,000 counties in America all have their own coroner, and he has his own rules for what he calls the cause of death. And there's not even a statewide standard in any single one of the 50 states in the union. So it's up to any coroner, and his rules might not even be rules in a book. It might just be in his head what he decides he thinks is the leading cause of death, and the second leading cause of death, and the third leading cause of death.
Yeah. And then there's no, you're right. That's crazy. So we're not even like discussing one thing when we talk about these things on,
we're totally not. On a large level. And we're also not talking about all the people who died at home of pneumonia after their COVID had come and gone. but they still had pneumonia and then died of the pneumonia. So.
Yeah, you're right about that, but this stuff's very hard to measure, especially with the excess death rates. It's very hard to measure, how many people were not going to the hospital because they were scared of COVID and dying of other things. How many people were not going to the hospital because they had COVID and didn't believe in the official treatments, and how it's very hard to parse this stuff out. But the other thing, of course, that just doesn't get nearly enough attention, though, is even you said your buddy with diabetes, and I'm not trying to like vilify anybody for, you know what I mean, like their health, but it's like we are just a very unhealthy country, and
I'm
of course
drinking
so much
Dr.
of
Pepper.
Yeah, listen, I'm not
in a can.
Yeah, I'm not like judging anybody else. I'm a little better than I used to be, but only because my wife makes me. But I'm still vaping and drinking and all this stuff, and it's not But I'm just saying, it's like, what is it? It's like 78% of the hospitalizations and deaths are obese people, or something like that, was one of the numbers that the CDC put out. I take these government numbers with a grain of salt, but and there is a lot that a libertarian could have to say about that. I mean, it's obviously there's been so much like poisonous information about health and diet that's been put out by these giant corporations in connection with the government. I mean, as I don't know if you guys ever watched that Fed Up, I think was the name of the documentary that Katie Couric made. Well, I hate Katie Couric, but man, that was a really good documentary. And she actually was really on point about how, Michelle Obama's whole get kids not so fat anymore movement just got completely co-opted, and how basically Coca-Cola and McDonald's and like all these big companies came in and they were just like, well, we would love to contribute to this, and we'd love to have a hand in crafting the literature on this. And then by the end of it, they turned it into this this whole calories in, calories out movement, where they were like, really all that matters is counting how many calories you eat. That's all that matters. Don't worry about like what those calories are made of or anything like that. Are you eating almonds or a Big Mac? Don't really worry about that so much. Just it's definitely true that over the last generation, this they used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes, and you can't even call it that anymore because there's an epidemic of kids who have it now. Like, it was unheard of for kids to be this over, because kids are always running around. Kids don't get fat like that, and there's, if you really wanted to have a serious conversation about like, okay, we need to control this virus, it does seem like this being such a huge part of what leads to really negative outcomes would have to at some point come up. This is also
take a walk, everybody.
Yeah.
Get out there and breathe some fresh air and get at least the minimum exercise, for God's sake. But wait, so we're running out of time. We got about 7 minutes left. And I want for the two of you, I know you're keeping better track of this than me, but I know there's new developments, to please talk about the victories in court against the vaccine mandates as handed down by the president. So I know there have been 2 or 3 court rulings.
Well, OSHA was so OSHA's mandate was suspended. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen with that. I don't think it's officially been defeated. The last I read was that it was suspended. So at least OSHA can't go forward with this if you have 100 employees or more thing. But the problem with it is that Biden announced it as a certainty that it's happening, and a lot of companies have already gone forward and started putting this into place. I mean, I know people.
I think the court just yesterday or the day before banned one that applied only to government federal employees and federal contractors. And now the way the district court system works on the federal level is their rulings only count for in their districts. And so, that's chipping away at it. But there's 9 or 11 different districts or whatever it is. So at least in a couple of these federal court districts, they have issued stays. I saw somebody in the chat room said, no, man, they're just kicking that thing off right now. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
By the way, I did see someone in the chat too said that they counted a guy in a motorcycle wreck as having COVID. I know that that's true. I remember Ron Paul covered that. It was a guy in Florida. I'm sure there's some of those. That's part of it. But
yeah, I found out today that even after this whole OSHA thing, that the company that I worked for up until June, it said they had not mentioned at all the vaccine mandates until today. The email came out today. You have until January 1st to get it, or you're gone, or you're on unpaid leave, basically. So even after the, and I know like the people that run this company, I know them personally, and I know that they're on top of this kind of stuff. They're looking at it every single day. Seems like they're just making a decision for themselves.
Yeah, did you see the thing in Canada where they were trying to track people, even vaccinated people's prior refusals to get
No.
vaccinated? Yeah, this is
Mm.
I'll have to pull this back up, but there's something really interesting and kind of incredibly creepy about this where it's like this weird thing where for people, you got to think, right, for people who are unvaccinated now, like after all of this, after this ginormous propaganda campaign, and not just the propaganda, but like really, I mean, in some ways, strict coercive by the libertarian, definition, but in almost every way coercive by like the leftist, the traditional leftist, definition, right? Where they would say that, well, yeah, I mean, your boss can fire you, but that's kind of forced because what are you going to do? Starve or whatever, which we may have disagreed with for a long time. But anyway, and I still kind of do, but anyway, that's extra pressure for sure. The people who have still not gotten it at this point have their heels pretty dug in to not getting it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like they haven't heard of it and then they're just going to be like, oh, there's a vaccine for this, like that. But now it's kind of like, but how much pressure can you put on them? I mean, how many people are in a position where they really can lose their job or they really can't? So it's kind of interesting to find out, first off, who conforms the quickest, who, not to say that everyone who gets the vaccine conforms. I mean, I don't mean it in like a negative way, but it's interesting to see of all the people who really don't want it, how much pressure it takes to make them do it. And if this isn't some, if somewhere there aren't some powerful people who are taking this all in and kind of learning some, social psychology lesson from all of it. And, we'll say.
Well, mea culpa. I mean, I think both of y'all interviewed me when they first started coming out talking about this passport stuff. And I said, well, I just don't think it's going to slide because essentially there's no way to enforce it that won't be discriminatory against the poor and therefore racial minorities. And so you have your left-wing ideologies clashing horribly. In fact, we did see the first big protest against the vaccine mandates in New York was a Black Lives Matter protest against the vaccine mandates, because that's who's being discriminated against. That's, 70% of blacks in New York City are not vaccinated. And so that means they can never go inside a restaurant again. And, but I guess I was too, as they say, white pilled on that. And I just thought that that's going to create such problems. But, really going after, New York City, I think, is the only place in the country where they're going after the general public, the customers like this. But what Biden's doing, mostly what we're talking about, is to continue being employed somewhere, which is something that doesn't necessarily draw the outrage of customers who are not necessarily affected, may not even know that the people behind the counter are being kind of treated that way. But I mean, there should be massive civil disobedience campaigns against this too.
Well, there have been.
It's not exactly violent coercion. Well, a sit-in is not exactly violent coercion either. But
I agree. But I think kind of the almost like the point that you're making, like, I think the counter to that it'd be like this kind of like left-wing ideological clash is that, as we all kind of know, it's not really a left-wing ideology that's driving all of this. That's just kind of what they use. I mean, it's a corporate ideology, right?
Yeah,
and
the left versus the liberals is more like it, right?
Well, right. But it's like it's a weird dynamic because it's like you have these like giant corporate interests, pushing the most radical leftist message, or at least one type of the most radical leftist message, some type of critical race theory, thing. And they push that, but of course they push it to the point that it's convenient to them. And if all of a sudden, like, look what happened for how much support Black Lives Matter got in the corporate press when they were protesting under Donald Trump. There were big Black Lives Matter protests about the vaccine passport. It got like almost no cover. Like the corporate press is like, you're not really that useful to us anymore. We're actually, when push comes to shove, we're a lot more concerned with pharmaceutical companies' giant profits than we are with, racial injustice or something like that. So you kind of see how this is all, it like, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of just like, I don't really think it's like I talk a lot about this on my show, but I don't think it's that the left overtook the liberals. I think it's that the liberals overtook the left, and they realized that this, like, using this kind of pushing this ideology could, like, neutralize the left, bring them all in, and then they can kind of, because it's the dumbest of the left ideology, it's not like they're embracing like some Chomsky like stuff. They're embracing like the dumb racialist stuff, that they can just distract you with all these nonsense issues at their pleasing, kind of, and they push so much conformity, like amongst the left. Like the left, if we can get the leftists to conform, that really kind of helps corporate interests. And so so many of them have been so brainwashed by all this shit that it's like, yeah, they just won't even like, well, yeah, I know we used to be against like disparate outcomes equals discrimination, but now we're just really into blaming the unvaccinated for everything. So that's where we'll go. And it is kind of working more than at least a lot of us had hoped it would.
I got to say too, though, I mean, I think, and maybe too much of this is in my imagination about the near-term future, but I'm just predicting more and more, harsh reactions to the right all across this country and across Europe and wherever regular elections are held.
I think you're right. I'm curious.
Australia, for example, their days are numbered.
Curious.
Everybody in office in Australia is doomed. Right now.
Australia's pretty far gone, so I'm a little concerned about that. I was thinking
they
that
could
for a
suspend
while.
Elections.
Yeah, that wouldn't look, man. They got people in these. They got people in these voluntary camps where 3 people escaped.
Yeah,
I mean, like you're like, well, if you escaped, it's not really that voluntary. You know what I mean? Like, this is.
But I'm predicting Republicans are going to win at all levels, all across the country.
I agree with you that,
and in 4 years.
I think Republicans are going to have a big midterm in 2022.
Yeah,
for sure.
The liberals are they're just sniffing their own farts on this. They're listening only to each other about this. I mean, you saw this, the way that they lost in Virginia. And then there were some great clips. In New Jersey, I guess, in these gubernatorial races. And then
they didn't lose, but it was very close, and it shouldn't have been.
Right, yeah, where it was supposed to be a blowout the other day. Oh yeah, we talked about this on your show. But so there were clips of these people on MSNBC going, "Geez, what happened?" And some of them saying, I think maybe we only listen to each other too much. Yeah, I think so too. And I think that hasn't changed, and that's not going to change. And they don't really realize the world outside their doors. Again, as we talked about, Dave, on your show, that they said, oh my God, look at these poll numbers that say Black and Hispanic support for Trump increased across the country, not by huge margins, but by some. And that's after 4 years of accusing this guy of being the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, for God's sake, and a Russian one at that. And so what explains that? And the answer is, even though he botched the narrative and claimed to be the leader of all lockdowns and whatever that summer and did not lead the narrative well, the Democrats had their narrative locked down, which was, we are the worst on this by far. And the Republicans couldn't possibly be as bad as us. And, I have friends who had never voted for Republicans in their lives. A good buddy of mine told me, I pulled the lever and just voted for all Republicans because of these lockdowns. That's it. That was a year ago, right? In the election last November. And I just think that's the single overriding explanation for the increase in Black and Hispanic support for the Republicans. What else?
I think the riots. I think the riots had a lot to do with it too.
Yeah,
I think the riots had a lot to do.
And that's part of the lockdowns and the consequences of all that anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, you're right. But there's this really goofy like Democrat view of the world, of the racial world, which is so removed from reality, particularly anyone who actually has spent time with different people of different races, and where it's kind of like, well, it's all minorities together against the white person, or like the straight white person or something like that. And they go like, well, Latinos are basically, they just identify as the exact same as Black people and gays and trans people. They're all in this together, versus that. But in reality, they're like, yeah, no, there's actually a lot, like racism and prejudice don't just go in one direction. Like they actually flow all throughout different cultures. And, a movement called Black Lives Matter that's like destroying neighborhoods, not going to be super popular with the Puerto Rican dude or the Mexican dude or something
or
like
Black
that,
people,
or even Black people. Yeah, right. So there's that. But I do think I think it's reasonable to be very concerned about where we are as a country. I'm very, very concerned. I think the COVID regime is going to fail ultimately, but I think it's going to be kind of like, it's going to fail the way the war on terror regime failed, where no one really believes in this shit and they can't really get what their ideal goal was. But all the precedents have been set. and so much has been accepted. And
Yeah.
no one's really making some push for like, oh, we shouldn't be groped at the airports anymore. Like, no, we've all just kind of accepted that's just part of life now. And so the masking and the like some of these restrictions, I don't think they're going. And I think that climate change is going to be the next one that they really try to push. And we'll see. We'll see where this all goes.
Movie?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, it's great. So they're all grown up. It's 30 years from now, and the COVID crisis is just finally ending.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I won't
that's
ruin
amazing.
it any more than that, but it's hilarious.
That's blackpilling.
Yeah,
Hey, I got some super chats here, and a couple of them are for Dave. Hi to all. Thanks for the great show, Dave. This is from Colin Brown. Dave, I hope you got the card and that everything's going well.
I got a lot of cards, and I don't remember exactly, but I really, really appreciate that. Everything is going very, very well. Thank you so much, my brother.
All right. Now, this is something that's not so easy. This is to you, Dave.
Okay.
Do you fear that going all in against the government's policies to fight COVID will create too high or divisive a bar for people to clear to rally support behind the Mises caucus?
I'm sorry. So ask that again. So going all in on the COVID policies?
Yeah. Do you fear that going all in against the government's policies to fight COVID will create too high or divisive a bar for people to clear to rally behind the Mises caucus?
So in other words, people who wouldn't support opposing the COVID
is that
regime?
going to scare people away?
Yeah,
if you're too hardcore on this.
No, I mean, I don't think so. And
I
I don't
think
think, I mean, like, there is to some degree, like the people you want to scare away. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to make as many people good on everything as we can. But it's kind of like if you were like, oh, if you're like in 2005 and you're like, you're really against the Iraq war, do you think that might scare some people away? It's like, well, if you can't accept that, then yeah, maybe you're just on the other side and you're not really supposed to be with me. So if you're like, if you don't want to like look at the like unbelievable destruction that the COVID regime has caused. Look, man, like Scott was saying, like there are hundreds of thousands of people who have died from this virus, but there is like no evidence at all that any one of the COVID regime's draconian policies did anything to mitigate that. Like nothing. I mean nothing. Like lockdown states versus non-lockdown states, no evidence that they've helped at all. Mask mandate states versus not mask mandate states, no evidence that they've helped at all. Even vaccine percentages, there's almost no evidence that this does anything, except perhaps you could make an argument that for the person who chose to get vaccinated or not vaccinated, but that's their choice. They can do what they want to do. They've like ruined. I mean, dude, have you seen childhood obesity is up like 30% in this country? That right there is like, and no one even cares.
Oh, and all the untreated cancers are coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, dude, they've destroyed. I mean, and forget. Look, the truth is this, right? And all three of us kind of know we are not in any way actually governed by the Constitution, right? Like that's just an idea, and it's not real at all. And they'll invoke it when convenient, I suppose. But there's so many things in the Constitution that are just blatantly violated that it's like they don't even pretend to have a justification. Look at the lockdowns; they don't even pretend to have a justification for those.
But Gavin Newsom tried to use the 10th Amendment in order to justify doing it in his state.
Well, right. So they will invoke it whenever convenient. But like we're not governed by the Constitution. We're governed by precedent, which is how all nations are governed. You know, like you could pretend a piece of paper written down somewhere actually means something, but it doesn't. It's what the people are willing to accept. It's what you're used to. It's precedent. It's what you can say. The precedents that were set throughout the COVID regime are like terrifying. And I think like that's the most important thing to like oppose. Like to me, like opposing the COVID regime is on equal footing with opposing foreign policy. And if that turns you off, I will try my best to convince you that you should oppose it as much as I can. But if that turns you off, then that's somebody who I'm okay with not having on board.
Well, and look, I mean, the thing is, too, is that's something to really lead on and get people who hadn't thought about it from your point of view before to stop and listen and go, man, you know what? That guy's making a lot of sense. That maybe as afraid of the germ as I am, or as many vaccine boosters as I've gotten, or whatever it is, he still makes a point about other people not belonging to me and how maybe I should leave them alone, or however it is you want to say it to them. I mean, that's the whole point of doing this is to get those new ears and get people thinking.
Let me hit a couple more super chats here. Top Lobster, our boy, $2. Happy belated birthday to Tom Woods.
By the way, I really fell for that. I wasn't just like
too.
in on the gimmick. It was just everybody was saying happy birthday. I wouldn't have seen 60 tweets saying happy birthday to Tom if it wasn't his birthday. And then after it, I was like, well, now I have to lean in. I mean, I can't bail on it. So I sent a couple more out.
Liam McCollum, thanks for the super chat. He didn't leave a comment. Death, $2. Chomsky has lost his mind on COVID as well. Yeah. He really has.
Yeah. Right after he endorsed my book, not just endorsed my book, cited my book.
I like to think he
came out and said, line them all up and kill them if they won't take my shot.
I like to think it was right after that interview that he lost his mind. So keep that in the but I will say, listen, it's sad. He's just been totally humiliating himself and just really tarnishing his legacy. And I'm not a leftist or a syndicalist or anything like that, but Noam Chomsky really does have a great legacy. He's a really brilliant guy who's put out some incredible work. And it's just like, I don't know, just out of respect from having gained something personally from his work over the years, like he is like in his 90s. Let's just say, like, I don't know. It's
try to look senile, away,
but but like that is really, it's unbelievable. And particularly for who he was supposed to be, this like left-wing care about the working class, like, again, like he's not like us. He's not like some libertarian, in our sense of the word libertarian. In his he does call himself that, but not in our sense of the word, where he would be like, well, hey, private companies have a right to do what private companies do. Like, that's not the Chomsky philosophy at all. His philosophy would be like, oh no, these are powerful interests colluding against these oppressed minorities.
Well, the guy interviewing him should have said, who do you imagine you're talking about when you say let them forage for food or whatever? Like, it's easy to, just like with gun control for a leftist, it's really easy to imagine that it's all David Koresh's are going to be on the receiving end of this. In other words, mullet-headed rednecks from out in the country that you don't know and you don't like and vote different from you. But that's not really who the victims of gun control look like, most of the time. And same sort of thing with this. Hey, Noam, but the people who are refusing the vaccine are the people who have historically been mistreated by the system and don't trust it. The same people that you stick up for. I think I guarantee you he's picturing some overall wearing mullet-headed Trans Am driving redneck who doesn't want to obey the Democrats or where, and so he loses his sympathy for them because he's not thinking. But this is, as you're saying there, exactly the kind of people that he typically would be sticking up for and would want to be sticking up for. Again, in New York, it's I don't know where this number came from, but I heard it a few different times. That 70% of blacks in New York City are unvaccinated. And the reason why, people, there are a lot of black leftist activists in this country, but by and large, blacks are kind of right-wing Democrats. Like, for example, they voted for Hillary and for Biden over Bernie Sanders in the last two elections.
It's a real interesting thing. That woke shit doesn't really work on them either. They don't really go for like the woke candidates or the left
they're not
candidates.
College freshmen.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're not inculcated on all that. They got a pretty realistic take on race compared to what a white kid in college is learning for sure on all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, they're not that radical. And
with the exception,
for example, they're very anti-government, and
with one exception, they never really support the Democratic candidate who's seen as the left winger. And that one exception would be Barack Obama, which for obvious reasons, you know what I mean? They support him. But aside from that, they were Clintonites.
Well, and in fact, in that election, they could have supported Dennis Kucinich, who really is a leftist.
Right.
And they did not. Where Obama is just a liberal. No, and as you say, it was black and maybe identified as more left, but was not really more left.
And was it Kucinich or what's his name? The guy who just died? I'm blanking on his name. Mike Gravel. Yeah. They could have supported too.
Another leftist. They didn't support either of the two leftists in that race at all. Yeah. And Obama, what's Obama? He's a conservative Democrat. He's Bill Clinton, is who he is.
But he didn't run. He didn't run as Bill Clinton. He ran as left of Bill Clinton. But even that, this was a moment to have the first black president and a real talented guy and all of that. It's kind of an
but anyway, the point being though that like grab the average black guy and ask him, do you trust government medicine? and I think probably he prefers, not from a libertarian anarcho-capitalist perspective, but just from experience, think he prefers his doctor in business for himself in the neighborhood over especially national government medicine, like a shot, because of not just Tuskegee, but an entire history of institutional medical neglect, and mistreatment. And Tuskegee is, of course, just the most famous, where they let these men suffer syphilis for 50 years or something to track and study what it did to them, and pretended to treat them and never treated them, as the syphilis destroyed their bodies and lives. And so, there's a healthy conspiracy theory culture in Black communities in America that, like, why should they trust this? I read the New York Times version of this. They quoted a poor Black guy in Atlanta saying, "You're telling me that the shot you're going to give me is the same one the rich people get? I don't believe that. Why would I believe that?
Well, dude,
That's
did you see
never
what-
been the case in my life. But now this time it is that I get the same as they get.
Well,
Get
look,
the
dude,
hell
there
away
are
from me
some.
with that needle.
But I get okay that, but even that, like, look, there's something about that that's wonderful. I just love that, even though I don't think it's true. I just love the conspiratorial angle. But I heard Rogan on one of his episodes say, and I gotta say, he kind of convinced me on this. But he goes, "Look, man, there's no way Biden actually got that shot on camera." And he goes, "Look, there's been, like, it's very rare, but there are cases of people who faint after they get the shot, and they actually right, at least as far as I know, they make you stay there after you get a shot.
Yeah.
Like, they make you hang out for, like, what is it, like a half hour or something like that? Maybe
Yeah,
not a
I'd say
half hour,
15
but
minutes, yeah.
but like hang out, because you might get a little lightheaded, there might be a little thing or something like that." And he goes, "There is no chance that they would risk that Biden would get this shot and then
Probably right.
on national television just get lightheaded and go, even if it wasn't like a severe reaction or something like that, just be like, whoa." And then this old man who really could have that reaction, there's no way they'd risk that. It would destroy the entire thing. Like, there's no chance. So they clearly, like, did it. I'm not saying he didn't get the shot. I'm just saying that there's no way that they gave him that shot. Rogan sold me on this. There's no way they gave him that shot live on television and just risked, maybe this will destroy your entire presidency, but it'll be a nice photo op, versus let's just freaking stick this fake one in you and then we'll figure it out later. So I don't know, man. It's like I think every libertarian has a healthy amount of, even if you're not like a conspiracy believer, a conspiracy entertainer, like, all right, I wouldn't put this past him. I'm not going to jump to certainty on things I don't know about, but I'm also not going to jump to certainty on things I don't know about than the other side, And so I there's something kind of cool about that. Like, there's something cool about the people who are willing to really have a healthy allergy to government propaganda.
Oh yeah, man. And yeah, again, you don't have to be an ideologue, right? It just depends on where you're from and what eyes you're looking out of. But you kind of have to be a fool if you've been around the block a couple of times in any real city, even in Austin, Texas, which is the Shire compared to Houston or Dallas. To see these guys as, the cops, for example, as your security force more often than your oppressor, instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
And then the same thing for whether it's the pharmaceutical establishment or anything else. The bigger it is and the closer to power in DC it is, the more corrupt it is, and the more immune from accountability it is, and therefore the worse job it'll do. So
let me read a couple.
Can see that. You can feel that even if you never read a single essay about it,
Sure.
All right, let me read a couple more super chats. I know you know who this is, Scott. Wood Scraps, 1798. Anarchist Triumvirate should be wearing Omicron black. Meteor COVID 2024. That's too black pilled for me, man.
I don't know what Omicron black is, but
okay, he goes, okay, wait,
reminds
I forgot.
me of Futurama, though.
Yeah. He goes, wait, he comes back and says, wait, I forgot. Smith Meteor 2024.
Yeah, there you go. Meteor could be a good vice presidential running mate for you there, Dave.
And
look, if I die, this guy's going to blow up the whole world, so you better not assassinate me.
And Drywall 0 or O says 3 best podcasts in one. Giggity.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
And that's it. Man. And that's our super chats.
All right. Well, look, man, before we wrap up, we didn't really give Pete enough chance to say what you think about, for example, the level of hysteria and political reaction in the new strain, and then especially what you think will be the reaction to that reaction.
I think that people who already have the shot are going to figure out that if they're getting this, there's something really wrong. I think a lot of people who've gotten the shot already I think a lot of libertarians try to be hyperbolic, and they believe that the only people who've gotten the shot are like, the religious COVIDians. And that's not true. I mean, people have gotten the shot for a lot of different reasons. And I think there are going to be a lot of those people who are like, all right, I was just supposed to get 2 shots. I'm not supposed to get this again. They're going to be like, wait a minute, you're telling me that now this new strain comes out and I have to get a booster. So I think they're going to start putting together that this is supposed to be like a flu shot where, there's going to be, they have to change it every 6 months or a year because there's going to be new, it's because it's going to mutate and everything. And then after Colin's saying that, it looks like it's pretty close to just becoming the common cold again. I think that they've already started to transfer this. The next thing they're going to go to is climate change. Yeah. And they've already had the first death or the first hospitalization in Canada where they said the person was in there because their diagnosis was climate change. And they've already started. I found articles from 2019 where they're talking about children's hearts being enlarged because of climate change, things like that. Myocarditis causing climate change. I think they're going to slowly go away from this, and people are just going to get sick of it. And I think they're going to go for climate change. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think they're going to get right wingers on this too.
I remember saying,
I don't think it'll work, Pete. They've been trying this shit for 30 years and this stuff for 30 years. But
they just did a 21. They just did a 21 month peach.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the thing, Scott.
It's like, look, man. It's just hot outside, but it's just you can't.
No, dude, it's the same thing. You're telling me it's more intangible than a floating abstraction that can maybe make you sick? I mean, I don't know. Look, dude, they just look.
The worst wildfires in California don't kill hundreds of thousands of people. They displace them temporarily, and then everything is okay again.
Yeah, so look, look, the rhetoric. I remember talking about this in March of 2020 on my podcast. They go, look, this is, forget even the conversation about whether they can sell it or not. This is the logical conclusion of the COVID regime, is the climate change regime. They have been saying for years now, and the rhetoric is that we're all going to die. I mean, literally, but this is what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren say. They say, like, we're going to go extinct. Bernie Sanders' line is that climate change is going to make the world uninhabitable for our children. That's like that. This is what they say. And if it's that big of a threat and we would lock down over COVID, well, then, of course, we would try to do it over this. Now, again, I'm not even saying, like, will they be able to sell it? I don't know. We'll be a part of the resistance. You know what I mean? But we'll try our best to make sure they can.
I certainly agree that that's what they're planning and that's what they're talking about.
So that's
look, this is the same thing that happened when Bill and Hillary Clinton were inaugurated in 1993, dude. It's Captain Planet and the UN flag and the baby blue. We're going to recycle and we're going to save the world from the global warming. And people were like, yeah, right. We like burning fossil fuels so we can have lights on at night.
Yeah. Well, hopefully,
you guys.
Hopefully that's what happens.
Ted Kaczynski over here might disagree, but for the rest of us, put your hood up, man.
If Trump and Kaczynski run in 2024, I got to reconsider this whole thing, Scott. I don't think I can handle that team. Anyway, I gotta run, guys. I gotta go record my show.
Yeah, we're way over here, but thanks very much for coming on, Dave. And
was I the first guest?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an honor. That's an honor. I love the show, and I've been watching it. And then I was like, I don't think they've ever had a guest on before, so I'm honored to be the first one.
More.
Yeah, we talked about David Stockman, but you're just as good.
Now that guy, he doesn't understand nothing. I'll come here.
I love David Stockman, man. All right, listen. In 2 weeks, I'll see you here, Pete.
Yeah, man.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Dave, for showing up. And that's the end of the Empire. Thanks. Bye.